The clock on my desk reads 11:43, and the house has finally settled into that particular kind of silence that only comes after everyone else has gone to bed. I sit in my study with the lamp casting its warm circle of light across papers I'm not reading, surrounded by the careful architecture of a life I've built brick by brick over 20 years. The walls hold evidence of my choices. Framed photographs line the bookshelf. Evelyn in her wedding dress, radiant and trusting. Our children at various ages, gap-toothed and laughing, growing older in increments across the wooden surface. There are books I've never opened, their spines perfectly aligned, purchased because they seemed like the kind of books a man like me should own. Everything in this room speaks to stability, to normalcy, to a life lived according to plan. But tonight, something pulls at me. A restlessness that starts in my chest and spreads outward until my hands won't stay still. I find myself opening the bottom drawer of my desk, the one that sticks slightly and requires a firm pull. My fingers move past tax documents and old warranties, searching for something I haven't looked at in months. The photograph is smaller than I remember, its edges soft from handling. The colors have faded to that amber tone that old pictures take on, as if time itself has settled over them like dust. A group of teenagers surrounds a campfire, their faces illuminated by flames that blur into streaks of orange light. Someone must have been laughing when the shutter clicked because half the group is caught in motion, heads thrown back, mouths open in joy I can almost hear across the decades. At the edge of the frame, two figures sit apart from the others. The boy on the left is unmistakably me at 17, lanky and uncertain, wearing a flannel shirt I'd forgotten I owned. But it's the boy beside me that makes my breath catch. Julian. Even in this grainy, amateur photograph, his presence is magnetic. He's leaning toward me slightly, close enough that our shoulders touch, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that always made him look like he was keeping secrets. My hand trembles as I hold the photograph closer to the light. I can almost smell the wood smoke again, feel the cool night air on my skin, hear the distant sound of someone's radio playing softly from a nearby campsite. That summer feels both impossibly distant and startlingly immediate, as if I could step through this photograph and find myself back there, 17, and trembling on the edge of something I didn't yet have words for. I traced Julian's face with my fingertip, careful not to smudge the already fragile surface. In the photograph, he's looking at the camera, but I remember what happened just moments after this picture was taken. How he turned to look at me instead, his eyes catching the firelight. How the conversation around us faded to background noise as something electric passed between us, unspoken but undeniable. The sound of footsteps in the hallway above makes me freeze. Evelyn, probably heading to check on the children or perhaps looking for me. The old floorboard by our bedroom door creaks under her weight, a sound I've heard thousands of times, but tonight seems loud as thunder. My heart pounds with the irrational fear of being discovered, even though there's nothing inherently wrong with looking at an old photograph. But there is something wrong, isn't there? Something I've never named, never acknowledged, something that makes me slide the photograph back into the drawer and close it with hands that shake slightly. The evidence disappears into darkness, but the feeling it stirred remains, spreading through me like warmth from a fire I thought I'd extinguished long ago. I straighten papers that don't need straightening and arrange my pens in a neat line, performing the small rituals of a man who has learned to find comfort in order. The footsteps above have stopped, and I imagine Evelyn standing at the top of the stairs, perhaps wondering if she should come down and ask why I'm still awake, why I've been distant lately, why I sometimes look at her as if I'm seeing a stranger. But she won't come down. She learned years ago not to press when I retreat into these late-night silences. We've developed our own language of unspoken agreements, our own careful choreography of avoidance. She gives me space, and I give her the appearance of the husband she deserves. The lamp hums quietly beside me, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then falls silent. This is my life, measured, predictable, safe. A good life by any reasonable standard. So why does it feel, on nights like this, like I'm slowly disappearing? Why does a photograph of a 17-year-old boy with dark eyes and an easy smile have the power to unravel 20 years of careful construction? I close my eyes and see Julian's face again, not as it appears in the faded photograph, but as it looked in those last moments by the fire, when he leaned close enough that I could count his eyelashes and asked me a question that changed everything. A question I've spent 2 decades trying to forget and 20 years being unable to answer. Morning arrives with the mechanical precision that governs everything in Maple Ridge, New Jersey. The alarm sounds at 6:15. The coffee maker begins its automated brewing cycle, and somewhere down the hall, I hear the shower running as Evelyn begins her day. I lie in bed for those extra few minutes, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar symphony of suburbia awakening. Garbage trucks rumbling in the distance, dogs being walked, the distant hum of commuter traffic building toward its morning crescendo. Our neighborhood is the kind of place where every lawn is measured to regulation length and every mailbox stands at exactly the same height. The houses are variations on 3 basic models, painted in approved earth tones, each with its 2-car driveway and carefully maintained flower beds. When we moved here 15 years ago, Evelyn called it perfect. She was right. In the way that a photograph can be perfect, everything in its proper place, nothing out of order, nothing unexpected. I work for Hartford Insurance, processing claims in a building that looks exactly like every other insurance building ever constructed. Glass and steel and beige carpet that shows no stains. My desk sits in a row of identical desks, and I spend my days translating human disasters into neat categories of liability and coverage. House fires become line items. Car accidents become actuarial data. Other people's chaos becomes my orderly reports. The routine is comfortable, predictable. I arrive at 8, eat lunch at my desk at noon, leave at 5:15. I know which elevator moves fastest, which route home avoids the worst traffic, which grocery store checkout clerk works most efficiently. Evelyn often jokes that I could navigate our life blindfolded, and she's probably right. But lately, something has shifted in the precision of my days. Small irregularities creep in. Moments where I catch myself staring out my office window at nothing, losing whole minutes to thoughts I can't quite name. Yesterday, I found myself driving home via the long route without any conscious decision to do so, just following an impulse that led me past the old high school, its brick facade unchanged after all these years. At home, our dinner table accommodates 4, but often feels empty despite our presence. Sarah, 17, picks at her food while scrolling through her phone, speaking in the abbreviated language of her generation. Michael, 15, wolfs down whatever Evelyn has prepared before disappearing upstairs to his room and the glowing screen that holds more of his attention than anything happening in our kitchen. Evelyn tries. She asks about our days, shares small neighborhood gossip, describes her afternoon volunteering at the library. Her voice carries the determined cheerfulness of someone working to fill a silence that grows larger each year. I respond with the appropriate sounds, not at the right moments, but I feel like an actor who has forgotten his lines, going through motions that once felt natural but now seem choreographed. She arranges flowers every Tuesday, replacing the previous week's display with something seasonal and coordinated. The current arrangement features orange mums and burgundy branches, autumn captured and contained in a crystal vase that was a wedding gift from her mother. Everything in our house follows this same principle, life organized into manageable, attractive displays. The cracks show in small ways. How I turn away when she reaches for me in bed, claiming fatigue or stress. How I volunteer for every overtime opportunity, every weekend project that keeps me away from home. How I've mastered the art of presence without intimacy, of sharing space without sharing anything that matters. It's during my late-night walks that I feel closest to something real. When the neighborhood finally sleeps and the streetlights create pools of amber on empty sidewalks, I slip out of the house and wander these familiar streets. The air tastes different at night, cooler, less processed somehow. I can walk for hours, past the identical houses with their identical dreams, listening to my footsteps echo off pavement and wondering when I became so afraid of my own life. On these walks, the memories find me. They slip past the defenses I've built during daylight hours, past the careful routines and measured responses. The memory of that summer, of Julian's voice cutting through the darkness around our dying campfire. Truth or dare, he had said, and I had chosen dare because truth seemed infinitely more dangerous. I dare you to kiss me. The words echo in my head as I walk past the Hendersons' house, past the corner where old Mr. Garcia still leaves his porch light burning all night. Julian's face in the firelight, the way he leaned forward slightly, waiting. How my heart hammered so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. How I looked around the circle of our friends, but they were lost in their own conversations, their own teenage dramas. How I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. A brush of contact, soft and warm and electric, before we both pulled back and laughed it off as part of the game. But those 3 seconds expanded to contain entire universes of possibility, of recognition, of terror. In those 3 seconds, I understood something about myself that I immediately decided I could not afford to understand. 23 years later, walking these safe suburban streets in the middle of the night, I can still feel the ghost of that kiss. Still remember how Julian's eyes looked afterward, searching my face for something I wasn't ready to give. Still remember how I spent the rest of that summer finding excuses not to be alone with him, building walls that I've never torn down. The house looms ahead of me as I complete another circuit, its windows dark except for the timer-controlled porch light that Evelyn sets religiously each evening. Inside, my family sleeps the sleep of people whose lives make sense to them, whose desires align with their circumstances, whose hearts don't harbor secrets that grow heavier with each passing year. I pause at the mailbox with our name painted in neat black letters, the Hartwell family, and wonder how long a person can live as their own ghost before they disappear entirely. The email arrives on a Tuesday morning, buried between notifications about quarterly insurance updates and promotional offers for lawn care services. I almost delete it without reading. The subject line reads, Westfield High Class of 2002 to 25-year reunion, with the kind of enthusiastic punctuation that makes my teeth ache. But something makes me pause, my cursor hovering over the delete button. I haven't thought about high school in years, at least not consciously. Those 4 years feel like they happened to someone else, a younger version of myself that I've carefully archived away along with yearbooks I never opened and varsity letters that gather dust in storage boxes. My adult life began in college, I've always told myself. Everything before that was just preparation. But as I click open the email, that careful separation begins to dissolve. The message is cheerfully generic, full of exclamation points and reunion committee enthusiasm. They've booked the Lakeside Lodge for the first weekend in October. There will be dinner, dancing, a slideshow of memories. Please RSVP by September 15th. Can't wait to see everyone again. It's the attachment that stops my breathing. A preliminary RSVP list, organized alphabetically by last name. My eyes scan down automatically, looking for names I recognize, faces from a past I thought I'd successfully buried. Anderson, Sarah. Martinez, David. Patterson, Jennifer. And then, there it is, halfway down the page like a landmine waiting to explode. Read, Julian. The name sits on the screen in simple black text, but it might as well be written in fire. My hands begin to shake slightly, and I have to set down my coffee cup before I spill it across my keyboard. Julian Reed. Even seeing his name in print after all these years sends something electric through my nervous system, a current that connects directly to memories I've spent decades trying to neutralize. I close the email quickly, as if someone might be watching over my shoulder, but the damage is done. The rest of my workday passes in a haze of distraction. I find myself staring at claim forms without processing the words, nodding through meetings where I contribute nothing meaningful. My colleagues seem not to notice. I've become expert at appearing present while my mind travels elsewhere. On the drive home, I take the long route again, this time deliberately. Past the high school, with its familiar brick facade and the football field where we spent Friday nights pretending to care about touchdowns while really caring about who sat next to us in the bleachers. Past the pizza palace where we gathered after games, crowding into booths and sharing inside jokes that seemed profound at 17. Past the road that leads to Millbrook State Park, where we spent that summer camping under stars that seemed brighter then, where Julian dared me to kiss him and changed the trajectory of my entire life in 3 seconds of contact. At home, dinner unfolds with its usual choreography. Evelyn describes her day at the library, something about a new shipment of children's books and a patron who insisted on checking out 15 romance novels. Sarah mentions a history test she's worried about. Michael asks if he can sleep over at a friend's house this weekend. I make the appropriate sounds, ask the expected questions, but part of me remains in that email, staring at Julian's name. Later, after the children have retreated to their rooms and Evelyn has settled into her evening routine of organizing tomorrow's tasks, I return to my study. The email still glows on my computer screen when I wake it from sleep mode. Julian Reed. 2 words that contain multitudes. I find myself researching him online, telling myself it's just curiosity. Social media reveals fragments of a life lived elsewhere. San Francisco, apparently. A career in graphic design. Photos of art exhibitions, hiking trips, dinners with friends whose names I don't recognize. He looks older, of course, but his eyes still hold that same intelligence that made him magnetic at 17. The same slight smile that suggested he knew secrets the rest of us hadn't discovered yet. There are no wedding photos, no references to a wife or children. This observation shouldn't matter, but it settles into my chest with unexpected weight. I close the browser and stare at the reunion email again. The RSVP deadline is still weeks away, but already I can feel the pull of possibility, the dangerous allure of seeing him again. What would we say to each other? Would he remember that night by the campfire, or has it been eclipsed by 25 years of more important memories? Would he still see something in my face that I've spent decades trying to hide? The reasonable choice is obvious. Delete the email, let the deadline pass, continue with the life I've built. Evelyn would never know I'd received the invitation. My children don't need to know their father once had a different name for happiness. The machinery of my suburban existence could continue running smoothly, uninterrupted by ghosts from a past I've learned to manage. But reason has never been particularly effective against memory, and memory is flooding back now despite my best efforts. The sound of Julian's laugh cutting through summer evening air. The way he said my name like it meant something more than just identification. How he looked at me across crowded rooms as if we shared a secret language no one else could understand. How, for one entire summer, I had felt completely and terrifyingly alive. I draft the RSVP email 7 different times over the next 3 days. Each version starts confidently. Yes, I'll be there, looking forward to seeing everyone, and then dissolves into hesitation. What if seeing Julian again confirms everything I've tried to forget? What if it confirms nothing, and I'm left with the knowledge that I've built my entire adult life around avoiding a feeling that was only ever in my imagination? On Thursday evening, as Evelyn arranges a new display of autumn flowers in the kitchen, I find myself typing words I don't consciously choose. Yes, I'll attend the reunion. No, I won't need accommodations. I live locally now. Yes, you can include my name on the final list. I hit send before I can reconsider, and immediately feel as if I've stepped off a cliff. The confirmation email arrives within minutes, cheerfully welcoming me back to the class of 2002 celebration. October 2nd at the Lakeside Lodge. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7. 27 days to prepare for a conversation that might change everything or nothing at all. 27 days collapse into 27 hours, then 27 minutes. I stand in front of my bedroom mirror on the evening of October 2nd, adjusting my tie for the 4th time while Evelyn sits on the edge of our bed, applying lipstick with practiced precision. She's wearing the navy dress she bought specifically for tonight, though I can't remember when we decided she would come with me. Somewhere in the whirlwind of reunion planning, it became assumed that spouses were included, that we would attend together as the unit we've presented to the world for 15 years. The drive to Lakeside Lodge takes us through countryside that grows more familiar with each mile. Past the old Dairy Queen where we gathered after school, past the intersection where Jamie Morrison crashed his father's car senior year, past landmarks that trigger memories I thought I'd successfully buried. Evelyn fills the silence with observations about the changing leaves and speculation about which classmates will have changed the most. I make appropriate responses while my pulse gradually accelerates. The lodge sits on the shore of Lake Millbrook, its rustic cedar exterior strung with white lights that reflect in the dark water. Cars fill the parking lot, sedans and SUVs that speak of suburban stability, of lives that followed predictable trajectories from high school to marriage to mortgages. I recognize none of the vehicles, but then again, we're all driving different cars than we dreamed of at 18. Inside, the main hall buzzes with conversation punctuated by bursts of recognition and reunion. A table by the entrance displays yearbook photos beside current pictures, a gallery of transformation that makes me acutely aware of how time reshapes us all. I scan the faces automatically, looking for one in particular while trying to appear casual, just another middle-aged man reconnecting with his past. The conversations follow predictable patterns. Career updates delivered with careful enthusiasm. Children's accomplishments recited with parental pride. Divorce mentioned or carefully not mentioned. Weight gained or lost. Hair thinned or artificially restored. Dreams adjusted to accommodate reality. I move through these exchanges like an actor hitting his marks, sharing appropriate details about my work in insurance, my children's academic achievements, my 15 years of marriage to the lovely woman at my side. But underneath the social choreography, my nervous system hums with anticipation. Every voice I hear that isn't his, every laugh that doesn't carry his particular timbre, increases the tension coiling in my chest. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe something came up. Maybe the universe is offering me one last chance to retreat into the safety of never knowing what might have been. And then I see him. He's standing near the far window, silhouetted against the lake view, engaged in animated conversation with Sarah Anderson, who apparently became a veterinarian and never left town. Even at this distance, even after 25 years, his posture is unmistakable. The way he tilts his head when he listens, the gesture he makes with his left hand when he's making a point, the subtle confidence that always made him seem slightly apart from the rest of us. Time performs strange mathematics in moments like this. 25 years compress into nothing, and I'm 17 again, watching him from across crowded rooms and feeling that particular mixture of admiration and longing I never learned to name properly. But I'm also 43, wearing a wedding ring and accompanied by a wife who has no idea that her husband's heart is currently attempting to escape through his throat. He's aged well. His dark hair shows gray at the temples, and lines bracket his eyes, but he still carries himself with that easy grace that made him magnetic in high school. He's dressed simply, dark jeans and a button-down shirt that looks expensive without being flashy. No wedding ring visible from this distance, though that observation shouldn't matter as much as it does. Evelyn touches my arm, asking if I'm all right, and I realize I've been standing motionless for too long. I murmur something about recognizing old friends and guide her toward the bar, using the movement to compose myself and plan an approach that won't appear too eager or too casual. But Julian solves the problem by finding me first. I'm ordering drinks when I hear my name spoken in a voice that hasn't changed at all, that still carries the slight rasp that made everything he said sound like a confidence shared. Nathaniel. I turn, and we're facing each other for the first time in 25 years. The reunion noise fades to background hum as we take in the changes time has made, the ways we've become different people while remaining fundamentally ourselves. His eyes are exactly as I remembered them, gray-green and intelligent, holding depths I'd once wanted to explore but never dared. The conversation that follows is surface level but loaded with undercurrents. He lives in San Francisco now, moved there after college and never found a reason to leave. Graphic design, mostly for tech companies, some freelance work for nonprofits. He asks about my family, my career, the usual reunion topics. but there's something in the way he listens to my answers that suggests he's hearing more than just words. Evelyn joins us, and I make introductions that feel surreal. My wife, my high school friend, two parts of my life that were never supposed to intersect. Julian is charming with her, asking about her work at the library, complimenting her dress, but I catch him glancing at me with an expression I can't quite read. As the evening progresses, we drift in and out of each other's orbit. The reunion follows its predictable arc: dinner with assigned seating that separates us by 3 tables, speeches from the class president who peaked senior year, a slideshow of yearbook photos that makes everyone look impossibly young. I find myself watching Julian more than I should, noting how he laughs at appropriate moments but seems slightly detached, as if he too is observing this ritual from a distance. The crowd begins to thin around 10 o'clock. Older classmates with early morning responsibilities make their excuses and head home to babysitters and Sunday morning obligations. Evelyn, who's been growing increasingly quiet, suggests we should leave soon too. But when I look around for Julian, he's no longer inside. I step out onto the lodge's back deck, ostensibly for air, but really following an instinct I don't examine too closely. The night is crisp but not cold, and the string lights create pools of warm illumination against the darkness. Julian stands at the deck railing, looking out at the lake where moonlight fragments on gentle waves. We're alone for the first time in 25 years. He doesn't seem surprised when I join him at the railing. We stand in comfortable silence for a moment, the reunion noise drifting faintly through the windows behind us. The lake stretches away into darkness, its surface occasionally disturbed by a fish jumping or a duck settling for the night. "It's strange being back here," he says finally, his voice quiet enough that I have to lean slightly closer to hear him clearly. "Everything looks smaller than I remembered." I know what he means. The lodge, the lake, even the town itself, all diminished by adult perspectives, by lives lived in larger contexts. But standing next to him, I feel anything but diminished. If anything, I feel more present than I have in years, every nerve ending awake and paying attention. We talk about safe things at first. Mutual friends we've lost touch with, teachers we remember, the surreal experience of seeing teenage faces aged into middle-aged bodies. But gradually, inevitably, the conversation turns toward more dangerous territory. "Do you ever think about that summer?" he asks, and though he doesn't specify which summer, we both know exactly what he means. The summer before senior year, when a group of us spent nearly every evening at the state park campgrounds, convinced we were living through the most important moments of our lives. Sometimes, I admit, though the word doesn't begin to cover the frequency or intensity of those memories. He's quiet for a long moment, and I can feel him deciding whether to push deeper into this territory. When he speaks again, his voice carries a weight that makes my chest tighten. I remember that night. Truth or dare by the campfire. The words hang in the air between us like smoke. I want to deflect, to make a joke about teenage games and youthful foolishness, but something in his tone stops me. This isn't casual reminiscence. This is acknowledgement, recognition, the naming of something we've both carried in silence for 25 years. My hands grip the railing until my knuckles show white in the string light illumination. Inside, I can hear Evelyn's laugh among the remaining reunion voices, and the sound feels like it's coming from another planet entirely. The silence stretches between us like a bridge I'm afraid to cross. Julian's words about that night hang in the air, and I can feel him waiting for me to respond, to acknowledge what we both know happened but have never named aloud. Inside the lodge, the reunion continues its predictable wind down, but out here by the water, time seems to have stopped entirely. More guests filter out to the parking lot, their voices carrying across the night air as they make plans for coffee dates and promises to stay in touch that we all know will fade within weeks. Car doors slam, engines start, headlights sweep across the trees as people return to their separate lives. But Julian and I remain at the railing, two middle-aged men caught in the gravity of something that happened when we were 17. I should say something casual, deflecting. Make a joke about teenage stupidity, about games we played when we thought we knew everything and actually knew nothing. But when I open my mouth, what comes out instead is the truth. I remember it too. I say, my voice barely above a whisper. Julian turns to look at me directly for the first time since we stepped outside. In the string light illumination, his face shows the weight of 25 years, but his eyes hold the same intensity they did that summer night when everything changed. He takes a breath as if he's about to dive underwater. I dared you to kiss me, he says quietly. And you did. The words hit me like a physical force. For 25 years, I've been the only keeper of that memory, the only one who knew how those 3 seconds of contact rewrote something fundamental in my understanding of myself. But Julian remembers too. Julian has been carrying this same secret weight, this same knowledge of what passed between us in the firelight while our friends laughed and talked around us, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring just inches away. I did, I confirm, and even these 2 simple words feel dangerous, like admitting to a crime I've spent decades covering up. The parking lot empties further. Someone calls goodnight from across the deck, but the voice seems to come from very far away. We're alone now in a way that feels both terrifying and inevitable, as if the entire evening has been orchestrating this moment when pretense becomes impossible. Julian moves slightly closer, close enough that I can smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that suits the man he's become. Nothing like the drugstore aftershave he wore at 17, but somehow the scent of him underneath remains exactly the same. Do you know? He says, his voice so quiet I have to lean toward him to hear. That was the moment I realized I was in love with you. The words detonate in my chest. Love. He's named what I never allowed myself to name, what I buried under layers of denial and respectability and careful distance. In love with me. Past tense, but still the most dangerous combination of words I've ever heard. I can't respond immediately. Can't breathe properly. My hands shake against the railing, and I'm grateful for the darkness that might hide how completely his admission has undone me. I was terrified, I finally managed to say. When you dared me, when I actually did it. I was terrified because it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Julian makes a sound that might be a laugh or might be something closer to pain. That's exactly why I knew, he says. You kissed me like you'd been thinking about it for months. Like it was inevitable. He's right. Though I never admitted it to myself at the time. I had been thinking about it. About him. About the way he looked when he concentrated on something. About how his voice sounded when he said my name. About what it might feel like to touch him in ways that went beyond the casual contact of friendship. But thinking and acknowledging are different creatures entirely, and I spent the rest of that summer running from both. You avoided me afterward, Julian continues, and there's no accusation in his voice, just observation. For the rest of the summer, you made sure we were never alone together. Because I knew, I admit, the truth coming easier now that it started. I knew that if we were alone again, if you looked at me the way you looked at me that night, I wouldn't be able to pretend it didn't mean anything. And that scared you. It terrified me. Not just the feeling itself, but what it would mean. What I would have to change, or give up, or face about myself. It was easier to build walls than to deal with the earthquake. Julian nods as if this confirms something he's long suspected. We stood 15 feet apart for the rest of senior year, he says. Close enough to seem normal, far enough that I couldn't touch you by accident. I used to watch you talking to Rebecca Martinez, trying to convince myself you were interested in her. I was trying to convince myself of the same thing, I tell him, remembering those awkward conversations where I attempted to manufacture attraction that felt artificial compared to what I'd experienced in those 3 seconds by the campfire. The lake laps quietly against the shore below us. Inside, the remaining reunion guests have moved to the bar area, their voices a distant murmur that feels like it belongs to a different world entirely. Julian and I exist in this pocket of honesty, this suspended moment where 25 years of careful construction has been stripped away to reveal the architecture underneath. He reaches out then, slowly, giving me time to pull away if I want to. His fingers brush against my hand where it grips the railing, skin touching skin for the first time since that night by the fire. The contact is light, barely there, but it sends electricity through my entire nervous system. I don't pull away. His hand settles over mine, warm and real and impossible. For a moment, we stand like this, two men in their 40s, married to the lives we built to avoid this exact moment, connected by touch that carries 25 years of unspoken longing. I feel something break open in my chest, something that's been locked away so long I'd forgotten it existed. It's not relief exactly, and not quite joy. It's recognition, the deep, cellular acknowledgement of something true that I've spent half my lifetime denying. Through the lodge windows, I catch a glimpse of Evelyn laughing at something someone has said. She looks beautiful and content, engaged in exactly the kind of social interaction she enjoys. She belongs here in a way I never have, comfortable with the rhythms of normal life, at home in her own skin in ways I've never learned to be. But here, with Julian's hand covering mine and his quiet breathing audible in the night air, I feel something I haven't experienced in decades. I feel like myself, not the version of myself I constructed to fit acceptable parameters, not the husband and father and insurance adjuster who moves through prescribed routines. Just myself, unfiltered and terrifying and undeniably real. The touch lasts perhaps 10 seconds before we both pull back, but like that kiss 25 years ago, it expands to contain entire universes of meaning. Julian's eyes search my face in the dim light, and I know he can see something there that wasn't visible an hour ago. Some wall has come down, some carefully maintained defense has crumbled. Neither of us speaks for a long moment. Words seem inadequate to the magnitude of what's just been acknowledged, what's just been felt. But the silence isn't uncomfortable now. It's full of recognition, of possibility, of terrifying hope. The drive home passes in silence that feels different than our usual comfortable quiet. Evelyn stares out the passenger window at darkness broken by occasional streetlights, and I can feel her processing the evening, perhaps noting how I seemed distracted during dinner, how I disappeared for longer than necessary when I stepped outside for air. She doesn't ask direct questions, but 15 years of marriage have given her fluency in my moods, and she knows something has shifted. At home, we follow our usual nighttime routine with mechanical precision, checking that doors are locked, setting the coffee maker for morning, ensuring the children are settled for the night. But the ordinary tasks feel surreal now, as if I'm watching someone else perform the rituals of a life that suddenly seems borrowed, temporary, constructed from materials that were never meant to last this long. In our bedroom, Evelyn removes her jewelry with careful attention, placing each piece in its designated spot on her dresser. The navy dress gets hung precisely on its hanger. Her heels return to their place in the closet. Everything in its proper order, everything exactly where it belongs except for me. I sit on the edge of our bed still wearing my reunion clothes, unable to transition into the comfort of pajamas and pretending this was just another evening. Julian's words replay in my mind on an endless loop. That was the moment I realized I was in love with you. The memory of his hand covering mine sends aftershocks through my nervous system, phantom sensations that feel more real than anything I've experienced in this room in years. The days that follow blur together in a haze of suppressed tension. I go through the motions of my established life. Insurance claims processed with automatic efficiency, lawn mowed to regulation height. Family dinners where I contribute the expected responses while my mind travels elsewhere. But I feel like an actor who has forgotten his motivation, speaking lines without understanding the play. Evelyn begins to notice the changes. How I stare into space during conversations, how I take longer routes home from work, how I've started declining social invitations we would normally attend together. She asks if I'm feeling well, if something is bothering me at work, if there's anything I want to talk about. I deflect with practiced ease, citing stress and fatigue and the general pressures of middle age. But the storm building inside me grows stronger each day. Julian's contact information was in the reunion packet, and I find myself staring at his phone number, drafting text messages I never send, imagining conversations that would change everything. The photograph from my desk drawer migrates to my wallet, then to my jacket pocket, a talisman of possibility I carry but dare not examine too closely. 3 weeks after the reunion, the pressure becomes unbearable. I'm in my study, supposedly reviewing quarterly reports, when Evelyn appears in the doorway carrying 2 cups of tea. She sets one beside my elbow and settles into the chair across from my desk, the one usually reserved for the children when they need help with homework. "You've been different since the reunion," she says without preamble, not unkindly, but with the directness that comes from years of reading someone's emotional weather. "I've been waiting for you to tell me what's wrong, but I can see you're not going to do that on your own." I look up from papers I haven't been reading and meet her eyes. She's wearing the expression she gets when she's made a decision, gentle but immovable, prepared for whatever truth is coming but determined to hear it. This is the moment I could deflect again, could manufacture some explanation about work stress or midlife anxiety that would satisfy her concern without revealing anything that matters. Instead, I surprise myself by telling the truth. Not the complete truth. Not about Julian specifically. Not about hands touching on a deck overlooking Lake Millbrook. Not about desires I've carried in secret for 25 years. But a version of truth that feels like stepping off a cliff. "I don't know who I am anymore," I say, and even these simple words feel dangerous, revolutionary. I look at our life, at everything we've built together, and I feel like I'm watching someone else's movie. Like I'm an actor playing a role I never auditioned for. Evelyn's face doesn't change expression, but something in her eyes shifts. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe relief that we're finally naming something she's sensed but never confronted directly. "How long have you felt this way?" she asks. "Years, I admit. Maybe always. I've been good at pretending, even to myself, but lately it's becoming impossible to maintain. I feel like I'm disappearing into this performance, and I don't know how to stop." She sips her tea while considering this, and I can see her connecting pieces she's been collecting unconsciously for years. My emotional distance, the careful way I navigate intimacy, how I've always seemed slightly absent even when physically present. "Is there someone else?" she asks, and though her voice remains steady, I can hear the fear underneath. The question hangs between us like smoke. There is someone else, in a sense, but not in the way she means. There's the ghost of who I might have been if I'd had the courage to face myself 25 years ago. There's the memory of 3 seconds by a campfire that rewrote my understanding of desire. There's Julian, who saw something in me that I've spent half my life running from. "Not in the way you're thinking," I tell her, which is true but incomplete. But yes, there's a version of myself I've never let exist. A life I've never allowed myself to consider. Evelyn sets down her teacup with careful precision, and I can see tears beginning to form in her eyes. But she doesn't cry, not yet. Instead, she nods as if this confirms something she's long suspected. "I felt your absence," she says quietly. "Even when you're here, even when you're trying to be present, there's always been some part of you that's somewhere else." I told myself it was just how some people are, that not everyone expresses love the same way. The word love sits heavy between us, because we both understand that what we've built together, while genuine in its way, has always been more companionship than passion, more partnership than romance. We've been excellent friends who shared a bed and raised children and created a life that looks convincing from the outside. "I'm sorry," I say, and mean it completely. You deserve someone who can love you with their whole heart, not just the acceptable parts. "So do you," she responds, and this generosity breaks something open in my chest. Even in her pain, even facing the dissolution of everything she thought she knew about our marriage, she can see that I've been as trapped by this construction as she has been neglected by it. We sit in silence for a long time, drinking tea that grows cold while we process the magnitude of what's been acknowledged. Outside, the neighborhood settles into its evening routines, porch lights coming on, garage doors opening and closing, the ordinary sounds of lives that make sense to their occupants. "What happens now?" Evelyn asks finally. "I don't know," I tell her, and this uncertainty is terrifying and liberating in equal measure. For the first time in decades, I can't see the next step clearly, can't follow the prescribed path of acceptable choices. The script I've been following has been abandoned, and I have no idea what comes next. But I know that continuing to pretend is no longer possible. The wall between who I am and who I've allowed myself to be is cracked beyond repair, and there's no rebuilding it. Whatever comes next will require a courage I'm not sure I possess. But the alternative, returning to the careful performance of a life that was never truly mine, feels like a form of death. Evelyn reaches across the desk and touches my hand briefly, a gesture of connection and goodbye simultaneously. We both understand that this conversation has changed everything, that we've crossed a line we can never uncross. The marriage we've built on foundations of unexamined assumptions and careful avoidance cannot survive this level of honesty. But perhaps, for the first time in 20 years, we can both begin to live with integrity instead of comfort. 6 months later, I sit at the same desk where this story began, but everything has changed. The photograph no longer hides in the bottom drawer. It rests openly beside my laptop. For teenagers around a campfire, Julian and I caught in a moment of closeness I no longer need to deny. Next to it lies my wedding ring, the gold band I wore for 15 years, removed not in anger, but in acknowledgement that some performances must end before authentic life can begin. Morning light streams through the curtains, illuminating a study that belongs fully to me now. The framed family photos remain on the shelves, but they coexist with new additions, books I actually want to read, a small sculpture Julian sent me for my birthday, artwork that speaks to sensibilities I'd never allowed myself to explore. The careful architecture of acceptable living has been replaced by something messier, but infinitely more honest. The divorce papers were signed 3 weeks ago in a lawyer's office that smelled of leather and resignation. Evelyn and I sat across from each other at a polished conference table, finalizing the dissolution of a marriage that had been more construction than connection. There was sadness, yes, but also a strange relief in both our faces. We were finally allowing ourselves to stop pretending that compatibility was the same as love, that shared routines could substitute for genuine intimacy. She's thriving now in ways that surprise us both. Without the weight of my emotional absence, she's discovered interests and friendships she'd set aside during our years of careful compromise. Last week, she mentioned traveling to Italy with her sister, something she'd wanted to do for years but never suggested because she assumed I wouldn't be interested. She was right. I wouldn't have been, not because I disliked travel, but because I had become expert at restricting my desires to fit acceptable parameters. The children are adjusting with the resilience that teenagers possess when adults finally stop lying to them. Sarah, now 18 and preparing for college, told me she was proud of me for choosing honesty over comfort, words that made me cry in the parking lot of her coffee shop job. Michael, 16 and increasingly independent, seems relieved that the unspoken tension that had filled our house for years has finally been named and addressed. I've started writing letters to myself, a practice that began as an attempt to make sense of the upheaval and has become something like prayer, not to any particular deity, but to the part of myself that spent decades buried under layers of acceptable performance. These letters aren't profound or literary. They're simple acknowledgments of feelings I'd never allowed myself to feel, desires I'd never permitted myself to name, possibilities I'd convinced myself were impossible. This morning's letter begins with the same words I've used for weeks. I am 43 years old, and I am finally learning who I might be. The process isn't easy. There are days when the weight of uncertainty feels crushing, when the comfort of prescribed roles seems infinitely preferable to this daily negotiation with authentic selfhood. I miss the security of knowing exactly what was expected of me, even if those expectations felt like wearing clothes that never quite fit properly. But there are also moments of startling clarity, brief glimpses of what life feels like when lived without the constant filter of performance. Yesterday, walking through downtown Princeton, I found myself genuinely laughing at something overheard from a passing conversation, not because it was expected or appropriate, but because it struck me as genuinely funny. Such a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. Laughter that came from my actual sense of humor rather than from social obligation. Julian and I correspond regularly now, careful letters that dance around the edges of everything we felt, but haven't yet figured out how to name properly. He's coming to visit next month, the first time we'll see each other since the reunion. I'm terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, uncertain what this new honesty between us might create, but finally willing to find out. The letter I'm writing this morning is different from the others. Instead of processing the past or analyzing the present, I find myself writing about the future with something approaching hope. Not the manufactured optimism I'd practiced for years, but genuine curiosity about what might be possible when someone finally stops running from themselves. I write about the apartment I'm considering in the city, small but full of light, with bookshelves I'll fill with stories that actually interest me. About the creative writing class I've enrolled in, a long-time secret interest I'd never pursued because it didn't fit the practical trajectory I'd mapped out for myself. About the possibility of learning to paint, of traveling to places I choose because they call to me rather than because they seem appropriate for someone in my demographic. Most of all, I write about the strange, terrifying, exhilarating experience of waking up each morning without a script to follow, of facing each day as myself, not the husband, not the father, not the insurance adjuster, but simply Nathaniel, 43 years old and finally curious about what that might mean. Outside my window, the suburban neighborhood continues its predictable rhythms. Lawn mowers hum in measured patterns, children wait for school buses, neighbors wave to each other with automatic friendliness. It's a good life for people who fit naturally into its parameters, and I don't judge anyone who finds happiness in its security. But for the first time in decades, I feel like I can breathe completely, as if I've been holding my breath since I was 17 years old and can finally exhale fully, let the air move freely in and out of my lungs without the careful control that had become so automatic I'd forgotten it was there. The letter ends where they all do now, with words that still feel strange and new. I am learning to love the person I actually am.